Hello, Claire.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. Okay, this is the first time I've used this, so I'm
Gotcha.
not used
Okay.
to it.
No problem.
Okay. Are you streaming this?
No, I'm recording but not streaming.
Okay. You won't mind if I stream this,
No,
do
I don't
you?
mind. I don't mind.
Okay. Okay, that's great.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
going.
First of all, thank you very much for meeting. I know, I was getting a little frustrated in the chat because the chat is very one-dimensional, right? The fundamental purpose and value in communication is being able to interact with someone and to be able to show points and have a discussion. And you cannot do that in a chat. You can't do it. You know what I mean?
I actually prefer communicating with people through text because it just makes the words more subject to analysis.
Okay.
But yeah, I did different strokes for different folks, I guess.
Sure.
Because I kind of like just leaving communications, and so people can come back to it in their own time. Otherwise, you'll just be stuck there in real time with the person who I don't know when maybe you want to do something else. But as I say,
Yeah.
well,
That's very different from my
so that's
perspective.
great, isn't it? We're doing
Yeah.
both.
Yeah. Okay. Well, proceed. What are we talking about today?
Well, I thought I'd leave it to you.
Well, okay.
You
So
wanted to talk about the Great Reset, and I said I'd rather talk about something else. But oh, well, up to you.
yeah. The Great Reset is kind of the stick that I'm on because in my opinion, it's a larger and more important topic than religion because if the Great Reset plays out the way that we see it playing out throughout the world, by the year 2030, you won't have the ability to have a religion. You will not be able to. You will not be able to follow Islam. Another follower will not be able to follow their religion. The Great Reset aims to make people genderless, religionless, cultureless. It aims to wipe out their history and their ethnicity and just make them a digit, a number, an entity. So that's why I kind of view it as important. And I get stuck on these things a lot with a lot of people, and they're like, well, no, I want to talk about this. And I'm like, well, you don't understand what's happening. Globally, there are trillions of dollars being spent to take away your freedom to be able to even worship in the way that you want to. So that's why I kind of view it as trivial. We can sit here and have a debate all we want about religious practice, but at the end of the day, it only comes down to faith, right? And one person's faith is going to be different from another. And at the end of the day, we cannot prove those to the other. So that's why I think it's just pointless in general to have these types of debates as, well, I believe this and you believe that. Okay, well, neither of us can prove with absolute certainty.
We can agree. We can agree about the rules, though. I
Sure, okay.
mean, we don't have to believe in exactly the same thing and exactly the same God, but maybe we can just agree about, well, there should be laws against murder, laws against theft,
Oh, sure,
laws
sure.
against,
So,
so I think that is a way to resolve our problems. Whatever we think about stuff, we can, or keep to ourselves.
okay, fair enough.
I didn't
I'll,
require you to have this, there's all sorts of things that I propose, and I know that the person who agrees to me isn't agreeing with me, say for the right reason, because they see that there's something in it for them, and but I could think, oh, but you're not agreeing with me for the right reasons, and therefore I don't like you, and I'm not going to let you agree with me,
okay.
and there are actually people like that saying, and I'm saying, if you agree with me, I don't care why you agree with me, as long as you agree with me, and we can agree on those rules. And that's basically what I'm on about.
Okay, well, let me then finish up my Great Reset discussion by saying that if it's not a well researched topic in your world and your platforms and your channels, maybe it's something you should check out and spend a little time because I think it's a real risk to how we practice law, how we do everything in our lives. It's a big risk, and so that's kind of what I center my platform around on. So now, going around to Muhammad's introduction to you on LinkedIn and this discussion of Thomas Jefferson and the Quran and all of this, I am struggling to understand what your points are and what we're trying to accomplish with that.
I'm saying that it would be better for Americans who
Mm-hmm.
are social conservatives to um, obey the commandments of Allah, which is the same Abrahamic God. I know Jews will say, "Oh no, it's it's a different God," but actually, if you've heard of the expression the Abrahamic religions,
Mm-hmm.
you would have to um, resolve the situation by saying, yeah, we got these Jews, we got these Christians, and we got these Muslims, and they all say that their way to the Abrahamic God is the best. But basically, they are worshipping the same God, and they're worshipping the same God because anyone who has any sense would want to worship the most powerful being conceivable, and that's the Abrahamic God.
Okay. So,
And
sorry.
yeah, and I'm basically saying, Jews have a different way, and Christians have a different way, Muslims have a different way. And this is basically what the religious disagreement is about.
Okay. Well, Muhammad kind of alluded to this, right? He said, "I believe that Islam can fix America. Would you agree? If not, why?" And I came back with a couple of points. First of all, to clarify, I believe he was asking if I am a constitutionalist. I don't know exactly what a constitutionalist is, but here's what I believe. The laws that we believe, conservative Americans, patriots, they believe that the laws laid out in the 1776 Declaration, original Constitution, is the law. It's the fundamental base that we derive our successful system from today. And anything else beyond that and changing that is a contradiction to the Constitution and is therefore against the law. For example, the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms. So any infringement on that is specifically called out by the Constitution, and that's what the government is trying to do today. So moving on to the religious state, I said no, Islam and not Christianity, nor Christianity for that matter, can fix our country or any country. If this were so, we'd have had at least send one example of it working in our history, and we don't. When religions are in charge of nations, they often turn out even more bloody than the foolish governments that lead them. And this is because religion calls for you to draw moral lines, and your moral line differs from mine and mine from the next person. And so then we become a nation of people who inadvertently wrong each other, not knowing we did wrong. And I think that that's pretty messy. I think that when the founding fathers decided to write the Constitution and use the terminology that they did, they saw that as a problem, both from their perspective and another perspective in the past. I think Muhammad mentioned, for example, the Crusades back in the 1400s, right? That was an extremely bloody time in which Christians were persecuting people of a different faith. That's what happens when you have religion mixed in with government. And so that's why conservatives believe there should be a very strong stated line of division between church and state.
Okay, I understand that European history is inevitably mixed up with Christian history because Europeans operated under the rules of Christianity. But I think the theology of Christianity should be understood because, there's no other religion in no other continent, and they just say, oh, we just had a European wars of religion because, there is no Egypt. People didn't have a war over religion; they might have a war over territory. So that there's something peculiarly schismatic about Christianity, and I think we should just go to the root of the problem and say, what is it about Christianity that caused Europeans to fight so much with each other? And I'm not denying that Europeans see Christianity as a basis of their greatness because it's a great religion. The
Sure.
West is a great civilization and all that sort of thing. But I think it is because they fought so much that they became so good at war that made them conquer the world. So
Right.
you can't dismiss Christianity from our history and pretend it had no formative influence on your character and your history, and you know, and also how Christianity operated when Europeans took it seriously. They burnt each other at the stake. They were horrible. Forget non-Christians. They were horrible to other Christians. So,
Yes.
as a Christian, you couldn't even deny the divinity of Jesus without being convicted of blasphemy and then being burned at the stake. And,
Right.
there were all these horrors happening all the time. It was part and parcel of,
So
European culture.
yeah.
And,
So
and, and, and that was okay until, you stopped doing it. You decided, oh, we don't want to do this sort of thing anymore. It's a bit barbaric. We don't want to burn people at the stake or execute them for denying the divinity of Jesus.
mm,
And then what happened was the American Revolution, which was really about rejecting Christianity and monarchy. I mean, that's what it was really all about, wasn't it? The founding fathers saying, no, we don't want to be told that Jesus is God. We don't want to be forced to tell everybody that's what we believe or be cancelled.
I
And, so I mean, I think that, and I think a lot of Westerners think it's a liberal achievement, this idea of freedom of belief. But I think I can prove it to you that it was actually an Islamic principle.
well, I'm certainly open to hearing that, but I don't think that the founding fathers were saying we don't want to believe in Jesus and we don't want to live with monarchy. I think that collectively there were several different divisions of people who believed differently from what the king was saying you have to believe. You have to believe this branch or this extension and these certain rules and these certain customs under the Christian faith, or else you're not Christian. And I think what the founding fathers kind of formed and the people who rebelled against that and left was no, we want to go to a place where we can worship God in our own way or in our own belief system, and that would be sort of non-restrictive to any religion form.
Yes, but I think I don't think people realize, how messed up the whole thing was because the whole point of being an absolute monarch, which subscribed to a religion that supported the divine right of kings, is that, if you're the king, then you expect your subject to follow your religion. And if they didn't like it, well, you could punish them and execute them for not following your religion.
Right.
And that was fundamentally what I think drove the Europeans mad. And so when they moved to the New World, and suddenly they realized they didn't have to follow the king anymore because he could do anything, you know after the American Revolution. That was how I think Christianity began to die. But everything I think was fine. Europeans went on to achieve great things until the last 50 years when they stopped practicing marriage. So, okay, you may not agree with me thinking of this, but I think Christianity is nonsense and absurdity. But that didn't stop Europeans from achieving great things because somehow they were able to compartmentalize what they did and what they were supposed to believe. And as long as they practiced marriage, they were able to consolidate and build on the achievements and acquisitions of their ancestors and their past. And they were doing okay until the last 50 years. And that was where everything all just went wrong.
Right. Well, I definitely agree with you. In the last 50 years, that's a common statement that I make from about the year 1960 forward.
Yeah, the
The
swinging 60s, it was even called the
mm,
swinging 60s, the sex revolution, the pill, the culture of
sure.
sex and drugs, rock and roll.
Yeah, I
So,
think
so,
everybody
so
has had
you
a
know, there was a time when Westerners began to let their hair down and everything hang out, and this is the consequence. You know, homo homo and
right,
gay marriage and transgenderism.
right. Okay, so I guess what are we trying to prove? Because if you come about round circle, I think what you're trying to say is that if in the First Amendment, if we had Islamic principles that did punish people that disagree, that this would be a good thing. I think is that your point?
No, I'm saying that, yeah, I mean, you know, marriage is universally practiced all over the world, in China, India.
Sure.
You know, people got the idea that it was a eugenic practice, and you know, they had to have children and they had to bring them up properly, and marriage was, you know, a kind of child protection scheme, and and, and as a necessary practice if they wanted to keep, you know, their nation in existence. And I suppose the West was a victim of its own success because, you know, once you're top of the tree, you think you can, you know, afford to not follow a few rules. And that was basically what the past 50 years have been, not following the most important rule of all if you want to keep your group in existence and apart from others.
Right.
Um, and now, you know, you tell any ordinary person that this is what they must do if they hate immigration, if they want to solve any of their problems, they have to marry before they have children, and they'll look funny at you and, well, you know, tell you you're sexist or, you know, a dinosaur or whatever. I mean, I don't think you can actually tell people that this is what everybody had to do.
Right.
You know, marry before having children. It's such a shocking idea to so many people that I'm I think a lot of politicians actually fear to tell people. I mean, to tell the people, you know, that this is what they must do to get their country back. You know, because
Right.
most people just they're horrified that is what they have to do,
Well,
and they
there,
can't do it
yeah.
under democracy because the you know the numbers of people already compromised by, you know, not being a married parent is electorally very significant.
Right. Well, I understand that point, but the point of American. This is where most conservatives say we do want to fight in principle the things that we disagree with, as we should, right? If that's why for example, conservatives are against sort of a globalist or a stronger federal government. The point of having all of these different states is within this system, you could choose how your state wants to go, not to be confined under a universal one size fits all law. That's impossible. A one rule that satisfies everyone is impossible to achieve. And it's even more so impossible when you take 50 states and multiple territories and overseas bases, and then you try and combine all of that into one federal law. And then it becomes even more impossible when all of these nations get together under a World Economic Forum or a United Nations and they try to enforce that as a global rule or law. That is impossible to do. That was the point of having these states is, okay, if for example California wants to legalize something that, for example, my state South Carolina isn't comfortable with, they're free to do so, and we will always stand by that principle. But that doesn't mean that we're not allowed to fight it in politics and say we do not want that here. That's the flashback that we're seeing, the lash out at people who disagree with that. They say, well, I don't want that in my state, and that's where I stand. And then the liberal left likes to accuse that person of being misogynistic, transphobia, whatever,
Mm.
whatever form it is. And that's where conservatives are growing impatient and starting to fight back. They don't have the patience in some cases to deal with this, or have had patience for a long time. Back in 2016, California started banning state-funded travel and commerce with South Carolina, and that affected many jobs here. And so we took that personally and said, okay, you get to do what you want to, and I get to do what I want to, but now you're holding business hostage. You've pulled us into this battle of identity politics through business. Don't be afraid when we fight back. And we're seeing that manifest itself. We're seeing that in a fight back against Coca-Cola, who has told us how we should feel on certain issues. We've seen that with Gillette. We've seen that with all types of companies all over. And so that is kind of the beauty of being in a free nation, is we get to stand out and say our piece against where the general direction and consensus is going. Under a monarchy or a dictator, we would not have that freedom. We would simply be quashed as we are in China. Anyone who speaks against the party, anyone who says a certain thing or goes a certain thing, they get silenced in one way or another, whether it's their businesses are blacklisted, or their currency is in somehow affected, or their accounts are canceled. We see this happening in the free world too. Canada.
So you're a Californian, you say?
No, South Carolina.
Okay, you're in South Carolina, and I didn't understand this California South Carolina thing.
Yeah, so
Um,
so we have all these different states in the U.S., right? 50, and then we have
mhm.
territories, and the idea of the U.S. was to be able to have a sort of consolidating a consolidating federal government that combined general laws, and then for the states to govern themselves.
But allowing each state, yes. But you also have this idea of an ever more perfect union, which sounds like a unitary state to me.
No, I
So the two conflicting ideas
no
in
I
in the minds of America, aren't there?
that yes, it is very conflicting in America. Where do you draw the line of the federal government so that it does not impede into the states' rights, and how far do you let states have their rights to where it doesn't override the federal government? That is a very common problem in the United States. It's a very common debate.
And the selection of judges in the Supreme Court is obviously a very political thing, because I
Yes.
remember how much you know
Yes.
trouble
Well,
Trump took.
what we've done, what the problem that the United States is in currently, is that we have sort of forgotten about the Constitution as a base rule, and we've divided even more. We've increased our polarity, and we're in this two-party system. And a common problem is that rather than honoring the law and both of us looking at it from the law, people are dividing and say, well, no, your party opposes mine, therefore I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get ahead to just win against you, even if it means circumventing the law. And this is happening in both parties. More so, in my opinion, for the Democratic left. That's why in 2020 I became a conservative and Republican. Prior to 2020, I had no care whatsoever for politics. But I can see that this idea of bigotry and my feelings are hurt, therefore I cancel you, I can see how that runs over the First, Second, and Fourth Amendment, and I can see that taking us down the road a few decades into a very nasty situation in this country. And that's why I have chosen a side, the side of conservatives. And there are some things that we have to fight, even in the state of South Carolina. I'm very disappointed in the times that Republicans have a chance to step up against something that wasn't right, or to take a stand on why we should be absolutely following the Constitution. And my governor, McMaster, can't be found. He's absolutely silent on the matter. That's very
Mhm.
frustrating.
But you see what the problem is, because people may call themselves conservatives or Republicans, but there are no principles of republicanism or conservatism. There is no official handbook. So, whoever happens to be the leader of the Republican Party or the Conservative Party will just say, well, it means what I say it means. And over the centuries, it's all been corrupted and I don't think conservatism means anything without social conservatism. And social conservatism it just means no sex outside marriage. And people of a bygone age understood this very well. But these days, if you try and tell any young person, they will look at you like you were a freak.
Right.
So, a lot of social attitudes need to be changed because social conservatism is it's associated with being, well, old, like a dinosaur, being really uncool, all that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And there's no way of changing. People want to be allowed to do the things they want to do, and young people want to have sex, and they want to go, they like to go shopping, and these are the things that will always be eternally attractive to young people who will have more energy than older people,
Right.
even if they can explain things better. And that's why you need a book of rules, and that's why I say the Quran. And I'm saying you don't have to be Muslim to understand that for whatever ideology that you say you support, you need a book of rules.
Right.
And this the Quran has conveniently, and it does also say no sex outside marriage, and those words are supposed to come from God, and that's why I think Muslims have managed to stay in existence because they have this written identity, which is almost as well. I think and Americans have this identity because of their constitution, which they hold almost to be sacred because, it was the founding principles of the American Republic. But even now they forget. I talk to Americans all the time, and some of them say, I want a king. It would be nice to have a king. And I thought, how can you say such a thing? It's so un-American, wanting a king. But they don't seem to realize, and some of them say, I don't care about the First Amendment. It never did me any good.
Yeah, I think it did a lot of people good, and they just don't realize it. Right.
Yeah.
The cycle that we're seeing on a large scale is the same cycle that we experience on a smaller scale in our daily lives and families and communities. What happens is when you free up those rules and you get nice and lax, right? People, they go out and they make mistakes for themselves and they have to learn. And ultimately, the cycle continues, right? Somebody pops back up and says, well, maybe we should have had these rules in place, like no sex before marriage and all this. But the problem is, once we institute them, right? And let's say we put Islam in the Quran, no sex before marriage, we put all these rules. What'll happen? Well, the same thing that's happened empires and kingdoms over again is that in another 200, 250 years, people will rise up and say, no, we're oppressed under this system. We're going to go somewhere else and do what we want to do. And then you have the next America being born, or the next Great Britain, or the next whatever country. That cycle has continued throughout our history over and over and over again. So the solution is not to repeat the cycle, right? It's to back up a step and make our Constitution work for what it is. You can have a social structure completely free of religion work alongside with religion, multiple religions in a country, as long as you value somebody else's worth and you follow the Constitution. When you start saying, you know what you're saying hurts my feelings, and therefore I should silence you, that has crossed the line. And those situations, we have to stop accepting in the public world, and we have to get them in front of a court system so the court can rule on it and then straighten it out. I don't know if you followed a lot of cases, but every case in the United States in the last 3 years that has had this amazing journalistic coverage and background and all of this media attention that has gone to court has done a complete 180 of what everyone thought, right? Amber Heard and the Johnny Depp case, right?
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Depp was raked over the coals. The public had forsaken him. The media was giving him down the creek. And Amber Heard was the messiah of women's rights and women's abuse. And it turns out when you get that in front of a court system and you scrape away all the pomp and the circumstance and the hype and all of that, you find that the law has arrived at the actual truth of the matter. And that was that Johnny Depp did not abuse Amber Heard. Can't be proven. That Johnny Depp did not do all these things to Amber Heard in the way that she said. She was painting a specific picture to gain her popularity and position herself for another victim to be taken. And the truth was arrived at. And this has happened so many times. Jussie Smollett, in the case of racism, how he was allegedly attacked on the street. And it turned out that he was financing this to boost his career, right? When you scrape away most of the hype and the nonsense that you see in the media nowadays, you find that the truth is actually completely different from what's being portrayed to you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the challenges that America has going forward is how do we walk that tightrope, right? On the one hand, we've got news media outlets reporting whatever they want, and it's damaging lives, it's damaging people. And on the other hand, you have the freedom of the press and the freedom of speech. So it's a very delicate juggle, but that's why things like defamation cases are soaring. Things like this. The media has to be able to say, yes, we have the freedom to say what we want and report what we want, even from our own perspective. But you have to do enough research and make a diligent effort towards understanding that when you post something, if it's untruthful, it causes damage to people's lives. This is why The View recently settled with Kyle Rittenhouse. I can't remember if it was like $17 or $34 million. It was a massive amount. And that's because they had one perception that they looked at through blinders. They had one idea, and they refused to be open-minded enough to consider any other possibility. And they reported on that, and they were 100% wrong. And it cost Kyle in defamation of character and stress and loss of sleep, probably friends and family as well. So, yes, we are having to learn, once again, the hard way that by laxing the rules, we have people going wild and abusing systems. But I don't think that the solution to that is going right back into an oppressive system of rules, especially under the guise of religion. We have tried that hundreds of times over in our history. It simply has not worked. This only creates resentment and hatred and unhealthy fear of God and chases people away.
You really can't see how having rules. I mean, but the American Constitution was based on this idea of having rules.
It is, but it's rules that are flexible enough for each of us to have our own way of doing things, right? You have to have a rule up until a certain point. I mean,
yeah.
So
it's a matter of how you interpret these rules, whether you want to interpret them liberally or, restrictively, and who controls the interpretation is a matter of politics.
Well, yeah,
as you know from how presidents fight.
You're correct. You're correct on that, but
appointed in the Supreme Court.
Well, you are correct on that, but one of the things that we see happening today is a very strong effort by, in most cases, both parties to muddy the rules. The rules are not actually up for debate and interpretation. How they've been interpreted and how we have ruled on those laws, we have a history and a pattern for 250 years, right? When the law ruled on, for example, the right to bear arms in 1776, and every case forward, that has set a precedent and a pattern for this is how we'll rule moving forward. The problem is when you elect a Supreme Court justice who is a political activist who wants to subvert that rule without formally going and changing the rule before Congress and say, no, I want to interpret it differently. The law is not there for your own interpretation. The law is the hard line, and then everything on the legal side is subject to your interpretation. You know, we may both have ways of running our own business that's legal, but mine may be morally wrong. But if it's legal, right? It's then up to society to determine, I'm not going to go with his business because they're kind of sketchy. I'm going to go with her business because they're reliable and trustworthy. That's where we get the freedom to choose, not saying, oh, well, I dislike this person's business, therefore I'm going to cancel them. That's taking the law in the wrong direction, and that's also perverting the rules.
Well, yes, and I think possibly the problem about people being guided, well, being hysterical about hurt feelings is because there are too many women in public life. And it works for them when they complain about their hurt feelings, but maybe men who complain about their hurt feelings would just be laughed at.
Right. Well,
And this is something to consider because obviously saying this will offend many feminists and people trying to pander to feminists.
sure.
But I
Well,
think that this is a big problem.
yeah. Well, first of all, anytime you're going to offend a feminist, I'm usually going to be on board because they're kind of messed up in their thinking, and I just think it's completely hypocritical, most of the messages they say. But no, I don't feel like more women being involved in politics and being involved in business has led to this. Right? This is a moral decay of social fabric. This is not the introduction of one sex. If you, for example, follow a lot of conservative women on YouTube, I follow a number of them through homesteading channels. The Liz Wheeler show on YouTube is phenomenal. She's I guess right wing or conservative type person. Um, these women are very strong and very sound in their judgment, and very capable leaders. Absolutely. So I don't think it's one thing. We have 1,000 things hitting us at one time. The technical revolution, uh, women joining politics and businesses in an unprecedented amount because society wouldn't let them 100 years ago and beyond, right? We have a million things hitting our society today. So to point to one thing and say that's the problem and that's the solution, I don't think is necessarily the right answer. I think backing up and creating a line at the Constitution and saying, okay, both parties agree we're not going to cross this line would be a healthy start to fixing America.
Well, agreeing about the rules is obviously necessary for the rules to be agreed. And I think all political activists understand that political activism is about changing the law, to suit a certain group or to make it for a certain purpose.
Sure.
And I think we might as well acknowledge that it is. I mean, I think it's necessary for people to see it in simple terms. And if people see it in terms of gender relations, they'll feel, more involved in it because if they think, oh, it's the Jews, for example, then, the people who don't think it's the Jews will just disengage. And but I think everybody is interested in getting married, or if not getting married, finding somebody to love. All these ideas that kind of get people involved in it, and
Right.
I think it's a national project anyway to get enough of the nation, having children and parenting them properly so that they're not delinquent or mentally ill and, rejected as employees of the future labor force.
Right.
And if they're not properly parented or trained, then the demand for immigrant labor which seems to upset everybody, will cause problems because people will think. I mean, businesses will say, well, the locals are useless. We can't use them. You got them. You got to keep them coming because we need our shops and factories, staffed with people prepared to work,
Sure.
or the harvest collected, or whatever work needs to be done. And
Yeah.
and I don't think enough emphasis has been given about protecting the working classes, so that there is a working class to do all the stuff that needs to be done.
Right. Well, okay. So, a couple things here. Um, First, I think it's sort of a knee jerk reaction to assume that all of society is collapsing right now and that there's no hope for the future, kind of thing. And the reason that I say this is because, for example, when we say moral fabric and social fabric, when you look at farmers, Mormons, those who are religious, those who are living on homesteads, they're still having a massive amount of kids, right? The Amish, Mormons, people who have isolated themselves in communities and continue to live in the way that they believe. Meanwhile, the revolution of transgenderism and things like this, none of those folks are having kids. So eventually, they're just going to kind of die off, and there'll be no legacy for them. I think Ben Shapiro goes into this at length. When we worry about society collapsing and all this, you have to realize there'll be a generation or two of this, for example, transgender type ideology, when we realize how many mental health issues it actually causes, and people were so overboard and overreacting to give them a place without cautioning them on the risks of, for example, body mutilation, hormone therapy, all of these types of things. So it's
Mhm.
at some point that's going to come back to bite somebody in the butt, and those folks are going to eventually just pass on. But there'll be these strong communities of farmers and working class people that'll be there ready for whatever. They've survived uh, centuries, and they'll keep on surviving because they have a strong sense of community.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess if you're Mennonite or Amish, I mean, you saw your parents and grandparents have lots of children, so you do the same. But, for those who don't live in these close communities, people think, oh, well, we have this option to be gaily married. We have this option to become a member of the opposite sex.
Right.
And the government is encouraging it from a very young age in primary school children. And this is obviously wrong and evil, but why isn't there anybody fighting it? And I'm saying the reason why no one's fighting it is because most American or Western men are not married fathers still living in their home with primary school children. So that's why they don't, there is no pushback. I mean, in the UK, the only pushback seems to come from the Muslims because at least they stay together after they marry, and they get, angry and upset about these things. But, for non-Muslim Gentiles, it's like they don't care.
Sure.
It's like, oh, well, school's just a babysitting service. We don't care what they're taught. And
Well,
I think that's the reason why it's been pushed through so easily in so many Western countries. Most men are not married fathers of young children, and they're not there to defend the interests of their children who are being indoctrinated into thinking it's okay to masquerade as a member of the opposite sex. That the government is actually encouraging mental illness that will result in people sterilizing themselves
right. I
in
definitely,
order to become a member of the opposite sex,
yeah.
which is, I think, tremendously evil. But it's just being steamrolled through all these schools, and nobody's fighting back because nobody cares because they don't know of any kid that is that sort of thing is being done to because they're not the fathers of these children.
Well, so there's a couple of things to address that. First of all, I agree with what you're saying. I believe that the government is trying to indoctrinate young children into not just their idea of gender and sex, but into a lot of things. We see this reset phenomenon in the last couple of months on how they're going to schools and educating kids on it's okay to eat bugs and things like this. Things that have not been staples in a person's diet for over 1,000 years because we've evolved are now being reintroduced as a sort of climate change tool. And I'm not in favor of that. But there are people fighting it. You just don't see the coverage of that. There are millions of people out there that are fighting it, that are having the same conversations that you and I are, but they're being censored by big tech like YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and they're being shut down and attempted, but it's not working. It's failing. Even on LinkedIn has turned from a strongly business platform to a political platform, because when you start affecting the home, people start getting outraged, and that's why you're seeing this public outlash. I think I posted.
Sorry, what did you say about LinkedIn and sorry, something about the home?
Sure, yeah. It used to be 10 years ago that if you posted any of the types of things that you saw today, that they would be publicly put down, because people would say, this is a platform for business, not politics, or not this, or not that, or that belongs. And so that's one of the reasons that you see people having these long debates and having these posts on LinkedIn. It's because it's hitting, these issues that we're talking about are hitting closer and closer to home. And I'm sorry, but anyone on LinkedIn who feels that a government interacting with their children on their behalf and making global decisions for them isn't going to affect business policy 10, 20 years down the road, that's absurd. That's absolutely insane. So, yes, America still has a vast number of problems to get through, but, once again, it's a relatively young nation compared to others. When you look at, for example, the left has been pushing, fossil fuels and carbon emissions and things like this to be removed. Well, we were using wood for thousands of years, and then coal for about 1,000, and we've moved up to gases and now oil, and we're slowly evolving into the development of solar and wind technology that could possibly be sustainable. But one of the problems with the left is they will not allow something to grow and mature healthy. They will push it and push it and push it until it's driven into the ground. And that's part of what they're doing, trying to hijack the energy in the United States by shutting off the oil line that was coming out of Alaska and several other smaller oil lines, shutting down those industries.
Why did they do that, do you think?
Well, it's intolerance. It's closed-mindedness. When you are, for example, a barista in Oregon, and you've been educated by the public school system and your college in one way, you have no idea, for example, what it takes to get food to your grocery store and fuel into your car, but you think you know. And you have a very distant, standoffish view of what it actually takes. I can tell you, I'm an engineer, and I've worked in manufacturing plants for going on 14 years now. It takes a lot of work to get those goods out. It takes a lot of work, from the line workers assembling it to the engineers doing the design work and launching projects and building new equipment. And the entire time that I have been in the industry, energy and efficiency has been forefront. Nobody's out there looking to just waste money. We would love a clean and efficient way to do it, but you have to give these things time to develop. That's why in California, for example, a few days after they sign one of their first restrictions on fossil fuel vehicles, they're asking people to stop charging their cars so much. Why? Well, an electric vehicle takes up almost 25 times as much energy as your refrigerator does. Our power grid is not set up to sustain that amount of drained energy as fast as people said it is. Now, will it 20, 30 years from now, as you allow companies like Ford and Tesla and these companies to naturally evolve the electric capabilities and get more efficient batteries? Yes. But placing a demand and hijacking all of that energy movement to say we must have it and we must have it now is a very childish and inefficient approach. That's why you will see blackouts and energy shortages as a crisis in the near future. They're doing the same thing with food, right? These people who have just graduated college and they have a liberal arts degree of some kind are somehow political activists and experts on science, engineering, farming, nursing. They know more than truckers. They know more than steel workers. They know more than factory technicians, and they're out there holding and protests and holding things hostage until they get what they want. And in a lot of cases, they're not understanding that one political party is just using that frustration and that anger as fuel to gain more power.
So would you agree with the abolition of the party system? Because, well, I also know that George Washington disapproved of political parties, saying that evil forces will exploit the unnecessary divisions.
Sure.
So, well, that's something else that's also sacred to many Westerners, the idea of representative democracy.
Sure.
But I'm happy that George Washington actually disapproves of political parties, because when that happens, you will get the competing parties disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing, and just holding up the solution to problems, because they don't want the other party to have the advantage by cooperating with them. So I think that there are lots of things that need to be changed. I didn't quite get what you said about being on LinkedIn. You're saying what? More things are able to be said on LinkedIn now than before for some reason. I just wish to return you to that subject, because I wasn't clear what you were saying earlier.
Okay, was this on the LinkedIn discussion?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, and you were saying it's possible to say more now than before? Was that what you were saying?
Well,
more controversial things?
Yeah, well, I think that more people are saying them. I still think that, and I've been banned on LinkedIn. I have had twice my account suspended for what I am putting out there. So I'm not saying that it's still accepted, right? There's still... LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft, which is a very left-leaning organization, and they are all for equality, diversity, and inclusion, up to the point that you say something that they disagree with, at which point they will immediately start censoring your viewpoint. They will immediately start throttling your posts, up until and including the point that they ban you from their platforms. This is happening with YouTube, Twitter, all kinds of social media platforms. But it's also being discovered. Elon Musk recently decided to pull sort of a Hail Mary football move, and he offered to buy Twitter. And in the investigation process of making sure, right, when you acquire a company that large, financial specialists and professionals will go in and audit that company to make sure what they have on the books is what they have on the books, and what they're saying is worth this amount of money is true. And a significant portion of Twitter was found out to be fake accounts and bots and algorithms specifically censoring one school of thought and then blasting or boosting the other. And so, yeah, I think LinkedIn, some of the things that I post today on LinkedIn would have been condemned by managers and people 10 years ago and say, look, this is not a political platform. This is for business and growth and things like that. And largely I agree with that. But today, if I make a post, there are hundreds of people, emailing me privately or sending me a chat and saying, look, I appreciate you stating this point of view because I'm not allowed to have that point of view at my work, or I'm not allowed to say that, or when I feel like expressing my thoughts, someone else shoots it down for their reason, and it's usually accompanied by some name of, being an extremist or conservative or right wing terrorist or misogynistic and sexist or whatever. And
Mm,
I really appreciate it. And that comes from men and women, by the way. I get lots of
mm,
women commenting as well, saying, "Hey, appreciate you uh,
mm,
posting that." So yeah,
mm.
I think we have a lot of growth issues to
So,
solve.
so do you think we should take the fight to LinkedIn? Is basically what I'm trying to say, because I think, if you're on LinkedIn, you're not some anonymous troll, right? On Facebook or Twitter, it
Mm-hmm.
means that you have skin in the game and you care enough to say what you really mean, and you're prepared to risk your professional reputation or
Well,
whatever.
that's certainly true. So I typically don't respond to people who are obviously have anonymous accounts or fake profiles, or don't have a photo, or aren't willing to engage in conversation that's healthy and productive.
Hmm.
There's a lot of those on LinkedIn. There's a lot of crypto scammers too recently.
Hmm.
Um, I did a couple of videos and recordings on actually showing how they scam people. I gave a very small amount of money, and of course, they wanted me to give more and more and more and more. But I did two different methods of exposing how they do that. And of course, LinkedIn allows that because it's not important to them. If I make a comment that is deemed as pro Trump or against Biden or against the party, that's usually caught within 12 hours. But if a crypto scammer is on there and is going after people, you see it in their descriptions even. You see some people that say no crypto in their title because they're tired of being solicited for crypto services and sales and things on there. I have seen a crypto scammer who I know is scamming go for 6 months on LinkedIn without being flagged. But largely, what I'm saying is that the type of post that I make today on LinkedIn would have been absolutely shut down by the public 10 years ago. And
Hmm.
today they're recognizing that it's a problem and that it's valid.
Yeah, so you get people saying, "Can you send me money? I've been robbed," and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And you think that that's obviously a scam, and you report it, and they say, "Oh no, it's okay. We're not going to
I generally don't report
take
it
you forward."
because one time, one time maybe an actual, and I apologize, I'm just going to make a quick comment here. I think I only have the meeting booked for an hour and we're coming up on 4:15, so if it ends, I'll call you right back. But
Hmm.
just wanted to make sure that you know that.
Okay.
No, I try not to because you never know when it is actually somebody needing money and people are using social media
Yes.
in
Yes, you're right.
all kinds of different ways now. I had a diamond salesman from Africa reach out to me on LinkedIn the other day. And the first thing I immediately thought is absolutely this is a scam, right? It
Hmm.
reminds you it reminds me of the old email that would come out and somebody needed their money freed up, and if you could just go get this for them and send it to them, they'd send you a $500,000. All these types of scams. But when I looked into it, it was a legitimate diamond salesman who they had packages for buyers to come over and look at the product and decide whether or not they wanted to buy it. And it largely had positive feedback on online reviews of people who were in the business. Now, obviously, I know nothing about diamonds. It'd be a horrible trade for me to get into, but I still researched it just to see if it was fake or not, and it was not. So I found that pretty interesting.
Hmm. Yes. So do you think political activism should take place on LinkedIn to show people that we're serious about what we're saying? Because it seems that Facebook is I don't know what they've done to Facebook. It seems that the political content that I used to get seems to be lost in all the ads and sponsored posts.
Right.
Um,
Well,
I don't know if that's your experience.
the problem is that there's so much censorship everywhere that people don't know where else to take it. If there was a place where we could express our thoughts freely without censorship, it would probably take place there and not necessarily on LinkedIn. If it were up to me, I would love to go to LinkedIn to find out. I'm an automation engineer, so I love to be on LinkedIn to follow up on the latest technologies, robotic applications, things like this. But because people like me have been censored everywhere else, on the Facebooks and on Twitter and all the other places, there's nowhere else for them to go. So they've migrated to other social media platforms. At the same time, there's been a birth of all these other social media platforms that don't allow censorship. Rumble is now my primary channel opposed to YouTube. And Parlor social media, Truth social media, all these different forms, second, first, have emerged as a way to have a freedom of speech method of putting out your thoughts without it being censored. So, is it necessary? I don't know. Is it good that it's happening on LinkedIn? I'm indifferent. I don't care that people express their political beliefs. If I disagree with it, I just ignore it, or I will ask a question to try and learn something. But it doesn't offend me. No, I think everybody. Again, most conservatives will refer back to the original Constitution, freedom of speech. You can go on LinkedIn tomorrow and have had two bad experiences with men, and tomorrow you're on LinkedIn saying all men are evil, all men are corrupt, all men are bad. I may disagree with that, but I'm not going to go flag that post and say it should be shut down, because you have a right to express your beliefs and your opinions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, I would generally, if I engaged you at all, ask, hey, is it fair to judge all men on two bad apples? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm generally not going to have that conversation, because typically the type of person who is posting something like that is already such a hardcore feminist, and they have no interest in actual justice. They're actually damaging men and women in their quest for vengeance. So generally, I don't engage with that type of person at all.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of this idea? Because I think if you divided social media platforms into his and hers, I think you'll get a different kind of um, free speech. So if you have a his section, I'm not saying girls can't enter into, but I mean the men will have a certain ethos and culture
Right.
and environment of expressing free speech, and I think it'll be freer. And of course, I think men can go to the women's section, but then the women would just want things done in a different way. And if you actually sexually segregate these people, I think people will be discussing things in a markedly different way, between the sexes. And I'm just giving you this idea for free
Sure.
because I would like to see a social media platform that actually does this.
I think it would be an interesting. Sure, give it a shot. Right, it hasn't been done before, and you can't say that something doesn't work if you've never tried it. That's for sure.
Mm.
I am laughing on the camera, though, because I don't see it being allowed in our society today. For one for one
Yes.
thing, if a bunch of guys go, well, I'm going to go over here and make a boys only club. There will absolutely be a meltdown of social media. There will be.
But it's part of your constitutional right of
Yeah,
freedom of association, right?
it is, but nowadays, right, the society that we live in, is if you say anything along the lines of, "Hey, I'm going to support my own agenda," then the counterparty comes out and says, "Well, that must mean you're against ours." It reminds me in I think 2012, the CEO of Chick-fil-A announced that they support heterosexual marriage, and the of course left wing came after them saying, "Well, then you must absolutely hate gay marriage. That's what you're saying," and that's not what they were saying at all. It reminds me of, I live in a small set of apartments here, and there's a back alley. And after work, there's a bunch of guys down there. We usually go down there and talk about guy stuff, right? Complain about
Mm-hmm.
taxes and complain about our day. And it's just a way of venting and everything. But the second a guy brings out his girlfriend or wife, everybody just shuts up. There's nobody talking because they're in today's society, you're scared to say, "Look, I'm going to have a men's only thing." Immediately the toxic culture will come after you and say, "Well, that must mean you want to be uninclusive of women and things." That's definitely something America has to work through and learn to get over. It's okay for groups of people to get together and worship based on their religion, or to have their own culture, or to have like interests, or whatever. And that's okay for people by gender to have, I'm going to have a boys club over here, right? Because
Safe spaces for men,
well, I
so
mean,
they can organize
yeah, well,
themselves against their internal enemies.
yeah, well, yeah, that's true. A man does need to have a healthy amount of self-reflection in order to learn to mature and grow. That's why, for example, I don't like the idea of religious implications on the Constitution, because for a lot of men, it takes getting out there and dating to get through some of those lessons learned, right? I think one of the first girlfriends that I ever had, I was extremely jealous whenever she looked at other guys, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not a bad thing, because in the next relationship that I had already worked through the pros and cons and learned the value and obstruction of that much jealousy. I learned how bad it was for our relationship, how toxic it was to me, and I
Mm-hmm.
got to work through how it was absolutely unfounded. And in the next relationship, there wasn't any jealousy. It was a very healthy relationship. So I do think it's very healthy for men to get to be able to get out there and learn and self-reflect and make mistakes without being criticized by the feminist movement at every single turn of the game.
Yeah, because I think if women demoralize men too much, then the men will no longer protect them, and even if they wanted to, they'd have forgotten how to.
Yeah, I
You
saw an
know.
interesting review on that very subject the other day, that women have gone after men so much now as equals that men no longer feel the need to protect women. Like, if you're my equal, right, and you're earning as much money, and then what fundamental draw or even biological need do I have to be this sort of protector of this family unit,
Mhm,
or any of these types of things? And so, yes,
mhm.
you will see a lot of men going their own way nowadays as a result of that movement.
Yes, and this means that the birth rate will decline, and this means that the national character will become more, ideally,
Yes,
more neurotic, more feminized, more risk averse, which is, I think, a feminine characteristic. It doesn't pay women to take risks, but it
right.
does pay for men to take risks.
Well,
But
2 points to that. If you actually study most of the roots of this feministic movement, it was actually a bunch of guys trying to figure out how to capitalize on having more taxpayers to exploit for money. Um,
mhm,
Destruction of the home and the family unit began with teaching women that men look down on them because they don't work, when in reality that wasn't true at all. Uh, if I were married and had a family and had kids, of course I would not impose my will on that, but I would prefer that she be sort of a stay at home wife, because it takes a lot of work to keep a house in order, to keep a family on budget, to keep things organized, to keep bills paid. I can tell you, as a single man in my 30s, having to do all that and keep up with two jobs and do a YouTube channel, it's an absolute headache. And that's why you see
Mm.
this emergence of those services. Nowadays in the US, you don't have to make all your meals. There's a service that will deliver your 21 meals per week. Um, there are there's a massive expansion in maid and cleaning services to maintain your household. And those men who are growing in wealth and have been forsaken by the female gender, are just done with it. They're just going out and paying $500 a month for all their meals to be cooked, and $600 a month for their house to be cleaned twice a week. And for the most
Mm-hmm.
part, outside of emotional and sexual needs, all of their other things can be taken care of by some service in society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Well, yes, and this will have an impact on gender relations because I mean the whole point of them is that I can't do any of the things that you can do, but if we if we're a partnership, then we would be able to do all we would
right,
get all the things done.
right,
But and really, I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, that was the whole point of sex segregation, that men did woodwork and metal work and women did domestic science and, sewing. So that there would always be the purpose in having a member of the opposite sex because they can do things that the other can't, and making them more likely to stay together because that's what partnerships are for. Uh,
right.
I stay with you because you can do stuff that I can't do, and you stay with me because I can do stuff you can't do.
Right. There's a fundamental strength in a family unit. Um, we both bring strengths and weaknesses that differ to the table, making us together much stronger than we would have been independently. Um, but I don't think it's necessarily relegated to sex. I've seen, for example, stay-at-home dads that were teaching their kids how to build massive Lego forts and things like that were really fun looking, and women who are, for example, welders. So I don't think it's necessarily evolving into traditional gender roles as necessarily the right terminology. I think people can do whatever they want within their family unit if they talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if I go 10 years down the road and find someone that I love, maybe she is also as adamant about growing her business as I am about mine. Maybe we both become business leaders, and maybe we outsource cooking food and cleaning the house. And in that case, what I would probably insist on us doing is coming up with a schedule where we can still spend a good amount of time together to grow emotionally, and to grow and be strong together. Having date nights, once a month and one weekend a month going out to do maybe a camping trip or something like this, and putting a series of points and checkpoints in there to keep that relationship openly communicating, constructive, and productive.
Mm-hmm.
Back
Yes.
to one of the questions that
But
you
I
had.
suppose
Yeah, sorry. Back to one of the
carry on.
questions that you asked that I didn't answer about would I prefer a one party system. Uh, just if I'm biased and I'm honest about how I would feel, yes, I would say I would rather have a one party system. Um,
Oh,
I would,
great.
I would of course have my party.
Mm.
The reason that I believe this is because conservatives are more closely aligned with the Constitution, and that I honestly believe that if liberals could just give us a decade to breathe, back off a little bit, and let us actually work without you grabbing onto the heels and stopping everything that is done, I believe that we could accomplish a lot of good things. Um, I I think that we could grow the Second Amendment and properly educate people on weapons. I believe that we could create platforms and things that everybody could use. I don't think there would be indoctrination of children into this nonsense. A lot of people falsely accuse the right wing of being nationalists and fascists, but look at the actual policy that's coming down the line from the Democratic Party. It's very unhealthy. It's very toxic. And even more so, one of the things that you will hear conservatives often say is we need to go after the Republican Party candidates that are doing absolutely nothing. We have a lot of dead weight in the Republican Party. They're doing nothing to accomplish anything. Most of our taxes in the last 30 years have gone to one side fighting the other. A lot of our taxes have gone to fighting what's already in the law, as the law. For example, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. There are millions, possibly billions of dollars going to try and take away that right. And why? It's because, well, some person in Sacramento, California, or wherever, they don't see the need to have a gun. Well, you're in an inner city, possibly an upscale neighborhood, and you don't see the need for a gun, but you refuse to listen to the words of someone who has points on why they need a gun. I live in a county.
Well, farmers need a gun, don't
Sure,
they? I mean, I can remember all the cartoons of Elmer Fudd on his farm with his shotgun.
Yeah, sure. I live in a county with 80,000 acres of national forest, and every time I go camping out there and I'm sleeping in my hammock, right above me is a little case with my 44 Magnum revolver, because if a bear comes around and he's interested in my food, right, I would much rather have protection. If he attacks me, I'm going to fire one shot into the ground and try and scare him off, which is what I've done before. But that animal has animalistic instincts, and they're never going to have more than that. And so if he gets frightened in the wrong way, or if he decides, you know what, that empty bacon pan isn't enough, I'm going to take a look at this guy over here in the hammock and see what he tastes like. I would love to have the opportunity to change his mind on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's all very interesting. But I mean, do you agree that fundamentally all this stuff about gender relations, and doesn't that all come from religion, though?
No, I don't think so. I mean, animals don't have religion, and they have sex, gender.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about humans,
Sure.
Not, because that's a difference there. And of course, animals don't get married. And,
Sure.
You know.
Well, yeah, you're right. Many things that we have today have evolved in the way that they have as a result of religion. Yes, I agree with that.
Because I think it's religion or some adherence to the rules, which we may willingly do, or maybe we only follow because we don't want to be punished, or the desire to please God because he wants us to do
Right.
certain things and not do certain things, and that kind of reinforces the obedience to these rules, and if it's been obeyed for a long time and it's a good thing to obey them, then you get the good results. You build up a civilization and an empire, and correspondingly, if you don't follow it's all lost in a very quick a short period of time. And I think, all this has happened before. The Ottoman Empire, they also liberalized sexually. Gay. It became okay to be gay, and there's no point, saying that you have these rules but and not follow them. There's no point having a recipe and not following the recipe. But um, so I think it's something to follow, to do with following rules. And I know that we don't like following rules because they're a bit restrictive.
Yeah.
But I think that's how it works.
Well,
And
you're
and
you're definitely right on that part because when you think about when you're growing as a child and you live in your parents' house, you have to follow their rules. And most of the time you don't understand them, and most of the time you think they're unfair. But most of the time when you grow up and you realize the ramifications of having not followed those rules and the consequences of what it might have led to, you're very thankful to look back. I know I'm very thankful to grow up in the household that I did with the Christian parents that I did and enforcing rules. And I attribute a lot of my success and my ability to go on and get education and things like that to those rules. But
mm,
but that also speaks to why we're having so many problems today, and that we've drifted away from the Constitution. You can get a little bit more strict and say, all right, let's build the religion into the Constitution, or let's just have religious countries. I don't think that in the long run, I will look back in history, but I can't find an example where that's been successful. It only leads to crusade type things. Uh, it,
well, I think people do follow those rules, and then they stop following those rules, and there will always be this idea of, you know, thinking that you can get away with it, and then realizing, oops, your civilization has fallen. And
right.
you know
Well,
I think that always keeps repeating itself in history, and nobody ever writes it down because they're probably too ashamed, or too, scattered intellectually and morally to write it down and saying, oops, it happened to us too. This
right.
thing that we thought would happen only to others, it happened to us too.
Well, it's happened many times and it's been written down many times. It's just people refuse to learn from it, or refuse they refuse to acknowledge that it's happening again under a new name. For example,
Yeah.
that's kind of my point on the Great Reset. When you look back at kings and monarchs and people that took power, and even in Russia, right, with the um, persecution of the Serbs when communism took over there, they immediately took over farms and said, look, these guys were crazy, they were terrorists, they were enemies of the state. And that's a lot of what's going on today. Even Biden's speech the other night, where he was decked out in true dictator style with the black and red, the shadows and the red lights, and teaching that anyone who says MAGA and anyone who says these types of things is an enemy of the state. The UN's going down the same path of trying to outlaw anybody who says that there's a conspiracy theory of global domination, and the FBI is all entangled in all kinds of legal nonsense for kind of breaching the laws and creating laws that they want to. So is the ATF in the United States. The ATF
What,
is
what is the ATF?
the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. It's a
Mm-hmm.
branch of the government that kind of started back in the Prohibition era, and it got heavily involved in the 50s and 60s when tobacco companies were kind of lying to consumers about the risks of tobacco. Large corporations were paying doctors to kind of give an untruthful view of things. They were taking statistics
Mm-hmm.
and
Smoking is good for you, and that
yeah,
sort
they
of
were
thing.
they were
Mm.
roundabout lying to people by taking a very very narrow approach to the statistical approach. They would take study and do studies, and that's a lot of what the media does today. What they're presenting is a shred of truth, but it's a very, very narrow scoped. It's a very small study done with 1,000 participants aged 16 to 20, and that's representative of all Americans and things like that. And it's just not true. And so nowadays, the ATF is heavily involved in, for example, illegal guns crossing the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And recently, they've turned inward, just like the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. They're attacking citizens. They're out to take and disarm citizens. There's multiple laws trying to come down the pipeline on, in order to even own a gun, you have to pass a psychological evaluation, and any person in your household and family has to pass a psychological evaluation and support that you're, sensible enough to own a gun, even an ex-wife. So let's you're trying to get a tool to protect yourself, and your ex-wife has to sign off that you're okay to use that. That's placing a lot of judgment or a lot of responsibility on someone who has not, in most cases, amicably gotten along with you. It's just it's unreasonable. The Second Amendment reads very clearly, "Shall not be infringed," and the government is trying to infringe on that. So, yeah, I'll agree with you that in whole, America is a mess because we're seeing new things and new freedoms and new ways of dealing with things emerge. But like all things, it's a process, right?
But don't you see also that the reason why the morals of your ruling classes are completely unregulated is that they have no moral system. They think it's okay to lie and talk nonsense and be unprincipled, and there is nothing to hold them to account, because you don't have a book of rules to say, hey, you shouldn't have you should have done that, you shouldn't have said that, and all that kind of thing. And so it means that they can get away with it, and if they get away with it, it will be at the expense of the people. But also the problem is that if the people themselves don't, if they don't tell the truth, if they don't use logic, they will themselves be helpless against the ruling classes, because they can't organize against them.
You're absolutely right to a degree, but I'll say this. Ultimately, what's going to happen from this, right, is that there will be moral lines and there will be lessons drawn. 10 years from now, when we actually start looking at the studies of transgenderism, and right now, when I study it, I'm looking at people that have already had their surgery and are 5 to 10 years down the road and already regretting it and coming out and getting criticized for coming out and saying, look, I made a mistake. I thought that in my emotional state and in the course of my life at the time that this was the best decision to make, and it was not. And they are being silenced for trying to teach society that lesson. Ultimately,
but surely people ought to know that to think that your life is going to get better by masquerading as a member of the opposite sex is, well, obviously not going to work.
Right. Well, I agree with that, but unfortunately, like everything, we have to learn the hard way. It's a human condition. It's not something that religion can necessarily fix. It's not something that the law can fix. When we set out to do something, building dams, building a light bulb, doing things, there were many, many failures along the way. It's acknowledging those failures and learning from them that allowed us to get closer to the successful opportunity. And if you go look at the first dam that failed, the engineer will deny that it was his fault, of course. And of course, when this all comes about and it's in the clear, people will deny that they were out there participating in this censorship of the truth. And of course it's a lie. But the hope is that 10, 20 years down the road, people remember. Look at the hashtag #MeToo movement. The hashtag #MeToo movement brought to light a very important problem in our society, which was that women often suffer from sexual misconduct, harassment, and other forms of abuses from men. The problem is that a lot of the women that came forward abused that system. Maybe it was somebody
Mm-hmm.
smiling at them in the wrong way, or brushed up against them on accident, and they
Mm-hmm.
accused them of being malicious when they weren't. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what happened is that eventually that died down because there were so many situations, like the story of the boy who cried wolf. He cried wolf too
Mm-hmm.
many times in a fake way, and now people won't listen. Well, a lot of those people who had patterns of doing that with men and abusing the system were exposed. And unfortunately, a side effect of that is a lot of women who actually needed help didn't get it.
Yes, but when that case, I forget the name now, but she was the one who accused Judge Kavanaugh of
Ah,
abusing
yes.
her 20 years
I
ago.
don't remember her name.
What's the
Yeah.
name again? But anyway, this was what I thought, where I thought religion would have helped, because there is a rule in, I think, Deuteronomy 17:5. I forget, but anyway, it said that the testimony of one witness is not enough. It has to be two or three. And I thought, well, if the Americans really took their Bible seriously, they would have used that. They would have used that first. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah, yeah, I understand what verse you're talking about and what you're saying, but here's the thing. All throughout history in Islam, Christianity, in every form of religion, there have been abusers of the system. And so what's going to happen is you go and put in a religious ruling class or make it a theocracy or whatever. Immediately, people will start saying, "Oh well, so and so abused it, so let's ignore the 90% good it does, and let's only focus on the 10% bad it does." That's generally what people focus on. That's why the Me Too move I mean not the Me Too movement, but the liberal left is being robbed of so much value today. People are understanding what that does is absolutely no good. The left has come out and just absolutely raked over the coals everything that we value in our society, and said it's all bad. It's all bad for this economy, bad for this, bad for that, bad for people, bad for the climate. And it's basically fundamentally not true. Or maybe we're just doing the best that we can at the time, and you got to give us a time to grow and develop and perfect these systems.
Well, I think that there's also a problem for men and women, because I think on the whole, women can rely on their victimhood and saying, look what that horrible, nasty man did to me.
Sure.
Well, if a man says, well, men who are victims of sexual offences, particularly if they were committed by women, tend to get laughed at.
Yeah.
And men who complain of being raped by other men, they also get laughed at for being gay.
Well,
They must have done something. So it doesn't work for men. I mean, when you were talking about the Me Too thing, I had men saying, well, I was sexually abused, but I can't complain. And I said, oh, what happened? And he said, well, it was at school and it was another boy of my age. I can't complain, can I? You
right.
know,
Well,
so
the
it's
problem.
different for boys.
Well, you're absolutely right, but there are many people having that conversation, just like you and I are having. And think about it: 15 years ago, we couldn't have that conversation, or if we did, it would be just. I think I just recently saw a YouTube episode. I don't know if it was "What Would You Do" or another show, but it was reversing roles to show the differences. It would be a man pretending to abuse a woman, and immediately people would interject. And then 15 minutes later, after the foot traffic was clear, they would reverse the roles. It would be a woman slapping around on a man on the park bench and saying you're worthless, you never do anything, right? And people were either snickering or not involving themselves. But by having those conversations and showing that and talking about it in the same way that we are doing now, we're acknowledging that there is a problem. And then maybe at the end of the day today, you and I are walking by that park bench and we see a woman abusing a man, and maybe we think about the conversation we just had and step up and say, hey, is everything all right over here? Can I help,
Hmm.
or maybe we all need to cool off and take a break, something like this.
Hmm.
But honestly, here's what would happen. I understand what you're saying with interjecting religion as a basis form of moral laws and moral rules back into the system. The same cycle would start right back over, right? For a time being, many women who find the household life very fruitful and rewarding would go back to doing that, and men would be breadwinners or whatever, and we would be protectors and providers and all of these things, and everybody would come up. The value that I see in that is when that I come home from work, for example, is that we can spend more time together because, for example, if we have two jobs and we come home, oh, now we got to stop and clean house and do this and do that, and it just takes up more stuff, more time away from each other. But let's say we ultimately go back through that and we put those rules in place. In another 80 or 100 years, we'd be right back to the same period of rebellion. People would say, oh, I don't understand why I can't have sex when I'm 18, or I don't understand why I have to stay home and clean all day and you get to go out into the world and make your own. We would be right back in the same position.
Yeah, which is why, there is this idea called maintenance, right? You have to maintain stability. You have to make sure that people keep following the rules, or yes, the thing will overbalance, and then there will be trouble.
Right.
It's always been like that,
Well,
I think.
there's people that we also have to give a little credit where we're not. You and I may think along the same lines and think, you know what, this is a healthier system. And it doesn't matter what my gender thinks or what I think a gender should be doing, but this is a much healthier role for all of society so that we live in peace. You and I may be thinking along that lines, but we also don't have any other person present to debate the counterpoints to that. I don't know, for example, if a person who has grown up in, for example, a non-religious household or a non-traditional household isn't valuing their independence and their ability to go out and earn money and not have children as a woman and be their own person. I don't know. That's the beauty of
It
being.
won't stop people from not having children,
Oh,
but
I agree.
it would encourage most people to do it. But there'll be a few people who go against the grain,
Sure.
and.
Well, that's what we have today is a manifestation of people going against the grain, and now um, we're seeing the outward ramifications of having gone too far in a lot of cases. So I think ultimately some of this is going to have to play itself out, and people are going to have to learn the hard way. Can conservatives go and protest and say we should stop telling children of 3 that because they had a funny dream, maybe they're a different gender and maybe they should consider, having a surgery? Yeah, absolutely. That's what I think. That's very evil and demonic in nature, in my opinion, to be telling a child. That child doesn't know what they are. That child knows toys, sleep, food, mama. They don't know anything about sexuality
Yes,
and
and,
gender.
and until we're 18, the legal position is that you're like a lunatic. If you haven't attained full legal capacity,
Mm-hmm.
you're minor. Somebody's in charge of you because you're liable to go off the rails. You're not responsible. You don't have criminal responsibility for anything you do, and
Right.
and, and that is why you don't put ideas into children's heads.
Right.
You know,
I,
and,
I
and and this is so obvious. It should be obvious, but it's not now.
well, unfortunately, right. This is like how everything is built. We have to learn the hard way. It'll have to come down to states being sued and us seeing the ramifications down the roads of making these very stupid decisions. That is the only way people will learn. If you intervene now, and let's say a Republican Party gets traction and outlaws some of that, there will always be a voice there that said, "Well, uh, you didn't let us try." And these are always the arguments that you face. Well, it's the same thing with capitalism from the other side. The few years that we actually got to give capitalism a try and honored monopoly laws without allowing giant corporations to take over and be scooped up by even larger holding companies that, now companies like, what was it, BlackRock and a few others there's like four that own a quarter of the world. Um, Before they got involved, we had a few good years, but we didn't give it a chance to be born and get mature before we were already calling it a failure. And that's a lot of what the left does with children. But unfortunately, people have to learn the hard way. The only way that people learn in this world today are being either hit in the mouth or hit in the pocketbook. Those are the only two things that teach people lessons. So either you go down the road 20 years and you have to pay for all of this therapy and all this reverse stuff and sue states and psychologists and things for telling kids this, or it'll never learn.
Well, we could start by saying, well, I told you not to do it. I told you so. And I know nobody likes being, told so.
Yeah,
But,
the I
but
told
I mean,
you.
that's the only way you can retain any kind of
Right.
moral
Well,
respectability.
well, the conservative position most of the time, at least here recently, has been to just check out, right? I'll just stop doing Facebook, or I'll just stop doing YouTube, or I'll just be part of my own community. They're checking out and they're leaving and they're going to be part because they're tired of trying to say, I told you so. They're tired of trying to say, look, we've repeated this same blunder over and over in history in many different forms. Why can't you learn from it? And the problem is that people don't learn. And not in that way, at least. The only way that they're going to learn is by making the mistake themselves in this case. And so, unfortunately, that's going to come at the cost of a lot of people's
Yes.
dignity and safety.
But we also have to understand how the demographics work, because it's the youth that have the energy and the stubbornness. And if they're programmed the wrong way, then they're going to destroy the next generation. Well, the older ones who know they're right, check out, as you say. We can't be bothered to post on Facebook anymore. We'll just,
Well,
retire into our little group, and we don't get annoyed by, the people who disagree with us, because we haven't got the energy to fight anymore, or they drop like flies
sure.
because they're getting old, and so this is something also to consider when the right people, I mean the people with the right views haven't got the energy to fight it anymore. And I think, in theory, you can plant ideas into people's mind to make them think, oh, I've done the wrong thing, I would like the other thing. And I don't think people should give up and check out. And even if you do get censored on Facebook, there are ways of, going round the rules, and,
Right.
make sure that your message still gets through when,
I,
even if there is censorship.
I understand what you're saying, but I think the reason that it's not a good idea is in the explanation that you just gave. In the 60s and the 70s, when all of this rebellion started and people started coming out this way, and all the way through the rock music of the 90s and the 20s, it was against being programmed a certain way. If you go and you decide, I'm going to decide which way to program people for their own good, in my opinion, you're no better than the global World Economic Forum telling people, I'm going to program people the same way. I'm going to program kids to do this, and I'm doing this to decrease the population so that we don't extract too many resources. And then the way that you're doing it is, I'm going to program people for the greater good so that we don't morally decay. Everybody has their own idea of how they want to program people to
Yes.
come out with
and
this
and and,
idea.
there are all these sort of competing moral systems. There's Judaism and Hinduism, and I think there is a way of telling, which is the best system, because you can look at how long, Jews have been around, and then you think, oh, and these Christians and these Muslims, they culturally appropriated their idea of scripture, of the narrative, of worshipping the most powerful being. And then you think, well, there are certain rules that all these major religions of the world follow, and it is respecting marriage and family values, respecting one's elders, the usual rules of prudence and discretion,
Sure.
abstention, and in fact, it's common to any old civilization. I mean, that's how your civilization stays around for long enough to be called an old civilization.
Right.
And it is always marriage and family values. And I think people can be made to understand that. I mean, of course, they're going to deny it and use all kinds of stupid arguments if they think they can get away with it.
Yeah.
But I think when things get scary, they will know where they went wrong, and we can at least say, we told you so, we were right, we predicted all this.
Sure. I mean,
And
that's going to happen, but I still don't think going back to a form of religion involved in something like this. Well, for example, your position, I think, as Muhammad said on LinkedIn, uh, that Islam could save America from, for example, this moral decay that we're all witnessing, and most of this that we're talking about. My first question to that would be, okay, for which country has Islam already saved and prevented from this moral decay? Because this is happening everywhere. This isn't just in the Western world, right? There have been many forms of this type of decay everywhere. Even teachers such as Socrates and writers like Shakespeare have lamented at the acknowledgement that every generation has said that their sons are more wild or more free spirited, and that their parents were more strict and reserved. This is going to happen for every single generation. This happens.
sure.
It happens in the world naturally through biology, right? Plants.
I've given you the analogy of you have the recipe and you don't follow it. So you can't really blame the recipe if
Right.
you
Right.
never even followed it. If I
Right.
give you directions and you never followed it properly and you end up lost, it's not my fault. I
Yeah.
gave you the correct directions, you just didn't follow it.
Yeah. So my question would be, okay, suppose let's hypothetically let's take this uh, passage of the Quran and let's apply it to the U.S. What do you foresee would be fixed that wouldn't immediately fall right back into disrepair and decay in 20 to 40 years that hasn't happened globally over and over again?
Well, all you can do, if you had all those rules and you stop following them, is you start following them again, and then you think, well, why didn't people follow? Why did we stop following them? And I think there will always be this evil inclination. We're so cool, we don't need to follow those rules
Sure.
because we're special, and this kind of evil inclination can be summarized as the seven deadly sins. We prefer to be slothful. We prefer to enjoy our lust and gluttony, and all the other sins, and we lose our reason, or we think the rules don't apply to us. We
Yeah.
think we are a special
Well, I
case.
mean, for example, I believe that cycle is going to happen no matter what. That we're seeing today, people forsake the rules and go, and now we're going to go against the rules. And one day down the road, we're going to think, well, that was stupid. And now we have all of this costly things to pay for and all of these messed up people that we have to deal with. We should have followed the
Mhm.
rules, so let's reinstate the rules. And then another generation will come along and question the rules. And I mean, it's the same cycle. So I'm
Well,
asking.
okay, but I mean, you're saying everything decays, and people lose their grip on
No,
things.
no, I'm saying it's cyclical. Cyclical. It's just like the climate. It's just like the rotation of the planet. It's just like the seasons. That it's meant to go up and down. It's meant to be like waves. It's meant to be like the tide. It's meant to be like this. That's how it was built. Is to have this period of ups and downs, and to realize that you've messed up and that you have to learn from that mistake. It's meant for you to have setbacks so that you learn from them. If you got what you wanted all the time, you would never learn anything.
Yeah, and once we learn it, we have to instill these lessons into the next generation, to our children. I
Right.
mean, I think
So
a lot of people, a lot of children now don't even learn the same things that their parents or grandparents
right.
did.
So
There's a lot of stuff that people don't know now that a lot of people in the older generation take for granted.
right. Well, and ultimately we'll pay for that, right? A lot of the older generation, for example, knew, uh, at least in my area, they knew how to practice forms of medicine from the herbs that grew in the ground. Uh, they knew how to grow crops in an efficient way, right? And now we have, God forbid, the World Economic Forum is now telling us how to grow crops. There's not an economist on the board. There's not but one engineer, and he's crooked. There's no farmers. There's no. It's all business managers and leaders who are selling ideas, and they are now suddenly the experts on farming. So, my question is, if you plug in Islam into the equation, you plug in Islam into America. The statement, the goal was that Islam can fix America, or this adopting this set of rules would stop this moral decay or whatever. What what proof do we have that it wouldn't immediately fall back into the exact same cycle? I mean, you take the world, let's say it had gone a different direction and it wasn't Christianity that was all the hype in Europe. Let's say it was Islam. I argue it would have come down to the same arguments, the same moral decay, the same cycles over and over again. That's my argument is I don't care what religion that you put in charge, right? That it would eventually arrive at the exact same conclusion because let's say you say no sex before marriage. How long before people are already questioning that? What country in Islam is that working that kids are not questioning that? It doesn't exist. It's the same for every Christian nation. People are questioning that. And so they get morally loose, and then we have the sort of situations in the U.S. that we're having. We have it all over the world. The whole world is protesting their leaders and the way of doing things, and they question it. And they go off and build their own systems and put in their rules, and until their rules don't work for their youth, and so on and so forth. So I guess
But it's easy to demonstrate that
okay,
only uh, only advanced civilizations are patriarchies, and all declining, primitive, extinct or soon to be extinct societies are matriarchies, because matriarchies are societies that prioritize the preferences of unmarried parents, while patriarchies are societies that prioritize the preferences of married parents who want to properly parent their legitimate offspring. So there is already a stark difference if we're going to see the world that way.
right,
And the difference is obvious. I mean, it's getting married before having children, and it's a simple enough rule to remember. Rather than whatever rules that went on in sex education classes, like do it only if you have contraceptive. Only do it if you really like you know, the other person. Even adults can't work out that that is going to work out
sure,
in the end. So and all these stories about what happened to people when they broke these rules are contained in the Bible anyway. I mean, the the Jews had some problem with was it the Moabite women or the Midianite women, and they were um, they were being distracted by these women, and they
mm,
started to fornicate with them, and then
yeah,
they got into trouble, and then there was a zealot who took matters into his own hands.
mm,
But it's there anyway, and all the examples. Well, there's an example in modern history in the last 50 years, and that would be part of the history for the next generation to learn. It depends on how you present it and whether you get that far, but I think we might as well think of it as if we are going to get our way, because if we don't think we're going to get our way, then we won't fight. We won't even say anything anymore. We will just give up, and
right.
well, I don't know what the people who give up do. I just don't find I can. keep quiet about it.
Right. Well, it's certainly hard to keep quiet about what's going on in the world, but that's why I started a YouTube platform and started speaking against this. In fact, I lost a job 6 weeks ago because of my political position. It's not easy. It's not easy to keep quiet about what's going on, and I think that's happening with people all around the world. That's why the entire world is protesting and speaking out. But it'll be interesting to see where it lands this time and if it differs from how we've landed the many other times. But I just don't see interjecting religion into government as a solution. That's never worked in our past. I don't know if it would work for our present. It might work for our future. I don't know. So far, I've seen no evidence of it having worked or any strong evidence of it going a different path if you were to try it. So, my next question I wanted to ask you about was the Thomas Jefferson piece in the First Amendment. I wanted to understand that a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
I have really no clue exactly what you were saying there, because I think that you were saying that a lot of the First Amendment was derived from Thomas Jefferson's understanding of the Quran. Is that correct?
Yes, he was a law student, and at the time it was fashionable for people to read about the Quran.
Sure.
That's what I read, and he did buy it, and he did read it in order to negotiate with the Barbary pirates. So I think we can safely assume that he did read it.
Oh, there's probably no doubt. Thomas Jefferson was an extremely well educated man. He was very well read. In fact, a lot of the forefathers were very, very educated men. And Thomas Jefferson, in particular, started 3 libraries in his time. One was destroyed in the War of 1812. He started again, and I think around 1814 had 7,000 books in his second library, which were sold to the U.S. government and started the foundation of what we now know today, the Library of Congress. And then his third library upon his deathbed had a little over 2,000 books, and I'm not sure what happened with those. But it would not surprise me at all that many of the teachings of ancient leaders and writings, including the Quran, would be influential in weighing how they decided to make their decisions and terminology in the Constitution. I also saw this information sheet that you sent me. I believe this is from the Supreme Court of the United States Office of the Curator, in which some of the carvings on the walls included leaders like Muhammad, Moses, Menes, Lycurgus, Solon, Draco, Emperor Justinian and Octavian, Confucius, King John, Louis, Hugo, Sir William Blackstone, all of these people, Napoleon. Yeah, I've no doubt in my mind that when they were writing the amendments to, specifically keep out religion and then be open to religious freedom, but keep religion out of the Constitution, I believe that they knew what they were doing.
When you take religion out of the Constitution, I understand that to mean that you guarantee freedom of belief.
Yes.
You don't say, if you're this religion, then you can do stuff, and if you're not, you can't.
Correct. Had the forefathers sort of been biased, right? They probably would have been biased towards the Christian faith. But instead they chose to state the words, and I've got it pulled up in front of me here. The First Amendment reads that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So, yeah, I think that there was a specific cause to realize, hey, we don't want to repeat what we just did, having escaped England and this monarchy who said you can't worship in this way. I think that there was specific thought given to the way that they wrote this and the way they worded this so that all religions would be free to worship under the United States law.
Hmm. Yeah, I think this whole thing of political correctness came from America. It's happy holidays instead of happy Christmas, right?
Oh, yeah, that's an absolute nonsense. So, one of the biggest issues that I have with America today is it's almost more evidence that there is a an organized resistance to Christianity, in my opinion. Look at how many nations like Brazil and Israel that can acknowledge their history and say we came from this. Yet in the United States, there's an effort to remove "In God We Trust" or an effort to remove statues, or in some cases completely tear them down. Uh, what? So what? Let's say you're an atheist today and you're enjoying the freedoms of America. Why does it bother you so much that 250 years ago, that a person who was maybe Christian, maybe not, wrote a piece of doctrine into the law that says we shouldn't hold people's religions against them and they should be able to freely express themselves? Why is that such an issue that you need to go back and erase history and try and remove the fact that it says "In God We Trust" or whatever their history is? What's wrong with acknowledging where you came from? That's one of the biggest issues that I have with America today, is that removal of things like that. Because what it does is, just like these race issues that we're getting into nowadays, it serves absolutely no good. In fact, it does more harm into disturbing and messing up the history so that people don't learn properly what was done the right way and the wrong way.
Perhaps it's a kind of civilizational mental illness, because if you don't have the right idea, then, bad stuff is going to happen. And therefore, that's why you have to choose the best religion possible, because if you don't, then all the destructive, crazy, subversive forces will kind of, cause you to, well, it's kind of dementia, isn't it? On the one hand, we can understand that, if you want to change the current order, you have to undermine its authority, undermine its narrative, even make people forget about it, and then replace it with your, the version that you want.
Yeah.
But I think that would be a mistake, because we should always understand history as a continuing process of, people making this mistake and maybe correcting them, or not correcting them and making a worse mistake. It should always be stated as honestly as possible, so people have the chance of learning from their own mistakes, because it's been said that, only a fool learns from his own mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others and avoids it altogether.
Sure.
We don't need to be such an empiricist about it.
Well, it goes right back to the cycle that I'm talking about, the necessary cycle of
The Tickler cycle.
yeah, the hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. And then we're back to the top of hard times create strong men again. We are living in good times, and good times have created weak men, and society is demasculating and condemning those men, and they don't have the same platform to stand on if they suffer abuse than a woman. Or if you go out and do anything, it's toxic masculinity, or there's this form of equality when in reality there's not. Men die more from suicide, and men are disproportionately affected by many things.
Well, yes, because it's so fatal. The fact that the national age is average natural age is 40, and what will happen is that the women are going to hang around for longer, and the men will pop up sooner, and then the young men are not being taught properly. So unless it's corrected ASAP, it'll get worse. Well, very noticeably, because you haven't got the demographics to make the correction.
Right. Well, I don't know the answer to it, but what I do know is that
All you can do is point out the danger, and then people can decide. I mean, that's all you can do, isn't it?
that's
I
true.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of get feelings of a feeling of fatalism in you. Yes, everything breaks down in the end, but I think perhaps at this stage we should concentrate on the possibility of correcting it using whatever means that are available.
Well, it's not that it inevitably. Let me see if I can share. Oh yes, I can share my screen. It's not that it inevitably breaks down. It's that it goes in a cycle. So once you create hard times, right? We make these difficult times and things like this. 20, 30, 40 years from now, we will be learning how stupid these decisions that we're making today are, and
Mhm.
we will renew. We will emerge having learned from those mistakes, right? Like you're talking
Mhm.
about, eventually someone will come up with a set of rules and say, nope, we don't need to be camping outside of Supreme Court justices' houses because we disagree with their ruling. We should let the law stand as it is, as the law has stated, but now we're encouraging people to go and protest at their homes to put pressure on them to feel fear for their own safety to influence the law. That's incorrect, and that's going to cost us dearly. Those good times are creating weak men, and those weak men are creating very hard times for us ahead. But in the future, those hard times will again create strong men. And it says men, we're using that term again in the form of humanity, right? There are women that are involved in this, very, very involved. And it's very critical that everybody get involved in this to prevent this type of uh, thing from getting too far out of hand. Because what happens when things get out of hand is or empires do collide, and wars happen, and many millions of people die. And many millions of people should not have to die in order for somebody to take a step back and learn a lesson.
Yes, and for that reason, I think people should boldly say what they think needs to be said, and particularly in the context of gender relations, because I think that's the thing that would engage most people, because most people are interested in having sex and possibly children,
Right.
and I think that's a way to engage people, and you know.
It's possible. I don't know how that would work. I don't know how that would be received. I think it might have been more successful at an earlier time. It would certainly be an uphill battle today to put in any type of rule into into society, because usually people aren't thinking about consequences. Most people that are trying to pass laws and things today are trying to satisfy the emotional need of now, and they're not thinking about the financial or physical need of tomorrow when they do that. So that's a lot of what, for example, transgenderism is I'm satisfying my emotional need now, but I'm not even thinking about the consequences of the physical or the financial
Mhm.
of tomorrow. In the documentary, "What Is a Woman?" you have transgender persons who are coming forward who used to be male, talking about how much their bodies are having to go through and how much money it's costing them just to sustain that unnatural form, right? Their
Mhm.
body is fighting all of these infections because you're trying to change nature. You're trying to go against what nature has given you to be.
Mhm.
And that's very
Yeah.
expensive.
Yes, yes, and that is the thing. In the religious books, they okay, in the Old Testament, it does tell Jews that they're not supposed to wear, men and women are not supposed to wear each other's clothes. And there's a verse in the Koran that simply states that God created a male and a female and tribes and nations and, and even the obvious needs to be stated. I read that verse and think, well, obviously, I mean, do we need to be told? And that was before all this, when people are afraid to even define what they think a woman should be defined as,
Right.
because they're afraid of being cancelled. And when we have such a degree of identity issues, then we won't do the right thing. We won't do the right thing if we don't know who we are and what we're supposed to do.
Right.
And so your society will become, more dysfunctional, more inefficient. And as for how it's going to be corrected, um, I think the answer is already, in the Bible, and I think the resources are available. It's whether the urgency can be communicated to people, and I think that's just a matter of communication skills. And one of the things that I remember reading recently was about how the Christians were persecuted, and the story was that the emperors who persecuted Christians um, suddenly started feeling guilty when they became old, and then they got their old people's disease, and then they go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been persecuting those Christians. Maybe their God is getting at me through making me ill and giving
Sure.
me liver problems, or whatever it was that was bothering them. So whether it's true or not, people, when they are afraid, will find reasons to attribute their pain to. And I think the God narrative is easy. It's easy even for atheists to understand. They reject it, of course, but once they think, well, if God exists, he would be angry with us because we've broken so many of his rules. We
Right.
are suffering, and if we're suffering, it must be punishment for sin. Oh, I'm not sure about that, but maybe if we stop sinning, things might get better. And that is what I think is so important about the theological dimension. It plays on the mind psychologically, even on atheists who reject it. Because when people get scared, they will they will get desperate enough to think of an easy narrative to understand and an easy solution. And of course the solution to error is correction and penitence.
Right.
And
Well,
um,
I agree. I agree that in general, probably some religious rules being applied would be healthier, but I don't think to have a free society in the way that America has agreed to have it, that would work. And maybe when I think of economies and empires and civilization, I think of the sine curve that I've thrown up on the screen here. Right? There's an
mm,
up and down and an up and down. And maybe if you interject some rules, the sine curve is not as extreme. Maybe the lows don't go as low, but maybe they restrict the highs from going as high because you restrict somebody's ability to be as inventive as they wanted to be because it goes against the norms, right? We've seen that plenty of times in our history where in religious societies, people who were trying to advance science and engineering and architecture were questioned and held back. They were deemed heretics or satanic
but that's
worshippers.
only under Christianity. It was this thing about Galileo and Copernicus, right? They were saying, oh, but the sun doesn't move around the earth; it's the other way around. And the Catholic Church is saying, shut up. If we let it out that we got that wrong, people will be asking the next question. It's like, what else have we been wrong about? But that only applies to Christianity.
Maybe I haven't done enough research to know whether or not Islam has um, unjustly persecuted people, but I find it hard to believe that any form of religion hasn't gone out against people at some point for doing something that they disagreed with as sort of a political move as opposed to whether it was actually just or not. I mean, that isn't just Christianity for sure. That's many religions. I don't know if Islam is afflicted by that, but many different religions have decided, okay, well, if we lose our power, then we lose our stance. So the greater good, for the greater good, we're going to come out and condemn this action, even though we don't really know anything about it. Um, I don't know if how many religions have done that, but I find it hard to believe that a religion with millions of followers hasn't done that at some point, because it's made up of humans, and humans have error, and
Mm, mm.
and that's always going to be the case. I can invent a new religion tomorrow, and everybody that comes on board agrees with the initial fundamental rules. Right? We go all take over an island and we start, and everything's kumbaya for a couple of years. But at some point, people are going to grow and develop in a different way, and they're going to start challenging the norms, and they're going to start experimenting with different things. And it may not be just science and engineering and architecture. At some point, it will be in sexuality or in how their home is ruled, or something. And it will go against the preaching of this religion. And at some point, a group or board of members or some people will decide that we should condemn this, right? Just as you're proposing that we insert into the, we should condemn sexual intercourse before marriage, and then of course there will form a resistance, and we'll be right back into this sine curve. You can certainly edit the highs and lows of this throughout nature by changing the factors, but I think the very nature of things moving forward relies on this cycle, this growth.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, we don't know what form, what surprises
Sure.
will go, will greet us around the corner. But I think, we've been given a few rules and a few roads, and some sense of direction, perhaps, and
Right.
and we should just use whatever is available that we think makes sense, and that's all we can do, I suppose. And as for the science and the Quran, I mean, the Quran is actually quite scientific. I mean, there's a description that sounds a lot like the Big Bang to me. There's nothing unscientific that I can remember from the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
And and also its rules are sort of fair enough if you read it.
Sure.
You might agree, and perhaps when you do read it, we can. I mean, if you ever read it, it would be great. If we could discuss, which verse you have a problem with, because
Sure.
because I think that would make a fruitful discussion.
No, for sure. I think that I think we should definitely follow up. I think I should download a version of the Quran in English and read through it, so that we can discuss those points. And
I
I'm
think you should just get yourself a copy and write in its
oh,
margins and
that
mark it and whatever,
that's
because
also
that
true.
was what
Yeah,
Jefferson did. He wrote in its margins.
that's definitely true. That's a very smart catch on your part. Maybe you can find a good note compatible version on Amazon or something and send me a link to it so that I can get it. And I definitely would like to learn more and see. I would like to challenge the idea that I have that religion is probably not the best leadership course for countries, because to me it always ends in a form of rebellion. But ultimately,
But it's always like that, because I think religion and politics is the same thing, and religion and politics is about law
uh,
and it's about war,
sure,
and there is no escape from that. But maybe we'll just get better laws and fewer wars if we choose the right religion. I mean, I don't think there was ever a bargain that you choose the right religion and nothing will ever go wrong. I think
right,
we're just faced with a prospect of it. If you choose the wrong religion, it will be worse for you than if you chose the right religion, which won't be as bad. But
right. No, you're definitely right about that. I don't think that it can ultimately be avoided. The the problem here is that we're human and we're flawed, and that will always be the problem. Whether you have religion, whether you have no religion, whether you have government or you have no government, uh, the best you can do is the best you can do, and that's about all you can do. But I would definitely be interested in reading more, and maybe we can meet back and talk about it. I think for the I think for the conclusion of this, we'd mostly agree in the same moral decays and issues, and then recoveries of different civilizations. That it kind of follows a cycle. But I think that your argument overall is that that Islam in America, for example, could possibly reduce the wasted time and the damage done. Uh,
Yeah, and the wasted lives of so many people who
sure,
would otherwise get married and have families
sure.
instead of being, weird and transgender and,
Well,
maybe kill themselves.
that's certainly a case. I wasn't in the military for very long, but when I was studying different countries and different things, one thing that really focused on when I was in the military was on North Korea. And I will say I don't agree with most of what North Korea does, but one conclusion that I came at one night, I was reading some text, and this North Korean diplomat who had somehow ended up in another country or whatever was giving his opinion on something, and he had said something along the lines of the reason that fundamentally North Korea was against, for example, Western civilization, is that it brings about moral decay, pornography, um, um, all of these things, right? And at the time, I was riding down a highway that had been absolutely trashed in the U.S. The interstates sometimes are lined with all types of trash, and it just reminded me of a scene in a movie where Geronimo was riding into this town that the white man had built, and the cavalry was all puffed up thinking Geronimo would be impressed with all the buildings and all the infrastructure and everything that had gone up. But all Geronimo was looking at was the ditches overflowing with sewage and the dead animals laying on the side of the street and all of the decay and the bad that had happened. So there's definitely multiple perspectives to things. So I definitely need to read up on it, and then we can maybe get back together and have another discussion on it.
That would be great. I'll send you the link. Thank you for inviting me to use your meeting thing. I haven't used it before, but I think it's worked out reasonably well.
Yeah, thank you very much. I apologize for any cross words, but I just simply cannot have a debate and a discussion in a chat forum. I can't. And maybe this is a difference in gender. Maybe I am not positioned to be able to handle that. But to me, even going back through it, LinkedIn had misarranged our entire discussion, so I couldn't even organize the points. You would make a point, I would make a counterpoint, you would make a point. But each time that I refreshed, LinkedIn would mess up the order.
Yeah, did they miss out a comment
Yeah.
or not put it in chronological order or something?
And I'm sitting there losing my mind because I'm an engineer. I need to see things in order and see everything laid out in order to have a discussion on this. And I was trying to go back into Word and form a bullet point list of your points versus my points, and it couldn't get done. I was getting frustrated, and I was going, well, good night. She really wants to have this debate. I want to have it, but I want to stop having it in this chat form that I can't even function in. So, but I definitely appreciate you taking time to chat with me. I think it's a very productive discussion, and I think it was surprising for me, and I think I learned a lot, and I have opportunities to learn more and to study more in directions that I possibly had never considered. So I definitely want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much, Steel Driver.
Thank you.
And I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you very much. You have a good one.
Okay, you too.
Okay,
Bye.
goodbye.